So initially, it was derived from pigs.
And if it's something life-saving, I don't want there to be shortages. I want there to be a proliferance of it. Like, insulin should be everywhere. You should be able to go to your corner store and buy it.
If you've heard any of the stories about like the evolution of how we got to the FDA, like it makes sense. Like it's definitely necessary.
Insurance covering the cost of medications might actually make the cost of medications more expensive.
No Walt Disneying this stuff.
Yeah. Oh God, the Walt Disney thing with the copyright law, like 75 years or whatever it is. That is insane.
You're just trying to censor me, man.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, a patent. Yes.
Casey's gonna spew some socialist bullshit.
All right, welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt.
And I'm Casey Rochford. Welcome to the show.
Oh yeah.
Tonight we'll be playing Brahms' Fourth Concerto. I can't pull that off.
All right, let's go into the episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there was this article I saw, and I think this is really cool. Colorado is capping insulin costs at $100. So, insurance is still paying, the drug companies, so they're not like losing money, but basically the insurance companies are having to chip away at their massive profits and make it so that people can get the things that they need to live. And I don't know. I thought pharmaceutical pricing would be something good to talk about.
Yeah, and that's a very complex thing to talk about, actually, because there's so many moving parts there. It's like to a lot of people, it's a really simple thing, but it really isn't. Man, that's a good topic. Like that. This is going to be nice.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What do you think about that law? Like, you think it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, or is it?
Well, I definitely think it's a good thing, because we're talking about in my worldview, even though it doesn't explicitly say this in our Constitution, I think just as humans, not even Americans, put that aside, as humans, we have a right to be healthy.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I mean, no, I think there's a little bit of divergence in what it means for something to be a right. As far as I'm concerned, rights exist in the negative sense, in that they negate what someone else can do to you, not necessarily in the positive sense. So if they do in the positive sense, that generally is, I would interpret that as an entitlement, which comes at a cost. So,
then I'll phrase it differently. I view this as a right to not have insurance companies rape your wallet.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. I think that the drug pricing is really out of control in this country. Now, it probably is elsewhere too, but it's kind of obfuscated by the particular system that those countries implement, like how they deal with pharmaceuticals and insurance and whatever. I think here it's a little bit more evident. Wow. Where to begin? on this. I mean, this is like, this is huge. But this is a topic I feel very strongly about because I really think it is too expensive for people. The costs definitely harm people at a lower socioeconomic level. And
yeah,
there is room for improvement there.
right. So I've got a pretty unique take on it because, while I come from the stance that, medication should be affordable, especially for these, you know, life endangering situations like not producing your own insulin, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But while I think those things should be affordable, I have worked in the pharmaceutical research environment. I've worked in manufacturing. Uh, I've seen GMP, that's good manufacturing practices. It's kind of a FDA regulated process. It's extraordinarily stringent, tight controls. Everything's documented. Everything's initialed and signed and witnessed. And there's immense amounts of labor pouring over every little detail. There's a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of money subsequently that goes into developing drugs. So I do understand that they have to cost a fair amount,
I've heard it's like anywhere from a few $100 million to a couple $1 billion to develop one new drug.
Yep.
That's the numbers I've heard. So it's kind of in that range somewhere, depending on what it is.
Yeah. I don't remember the exact numbers, but just the regulatory practice on from a research facility standpoint is in the millions.
Yeah.
And then you tack on the regulatory aspect from the manufacturing for the drug, and that just adds up, and your labor is in the millions. Across the 10 years it takes to go from concept to shelf.
Yeah, and that I mean, that's a valid point. I mean, if you have something experimental and new, some kind of never before seen medication or drug or something, like, it's going to be expensive, especially with all the regulations and processes we have in this country. But what about things, you mentioned insulin, and insulin's been around for like half a century. What? There's no reason it should be expensive now, having been developed that long ago. So what do you think some of the causes of that high cost are?
Well, so initially it was derived from pigs, and there was minor differences, but it was effective. And then they made a recombinant human form that was obviously better for humans, and that changes the patent, of course. So the patent extends out, and I think they basically just keep tweaking the patent enough to carry it out. And I have to say that feels a little disingenuous, because I've seen the patent process too. Like, I had my name on a provisional patent at one point.
Nice.
There's a whole other headache that goes into the patent process.
Yeah.
And more cost, of course.
I can imagine.
But yeah, so I've seen the little like nitty gritty stuff that goes on. Like, basically you start with a big, huge generic blanket idea, right? Let's say it's a small molecule.
Mm-hmm.
You have like your carbon structure, and then a whole bunch of little X's that say this could be anything branching off of here and there, or maybe over here, and and you file that, and then the judges say, no, that's too generic. You go back and you whittle that down. And so you do this back and forth until you get down to like a few structures that are reasonably similar.
Mm-hmm.
And then you basically have your patent. So where I'm going with that is that you have this ability to make a minor tweak in a molecular structure and call it something new because it wasn't included in that other patent, you know?
Yeah, and I think maybe that might be a flaw in the patent system. There were some thoughts that I had on this that kind of sprung to mind as far as the causes of why it's so expensive. Now, I mean, when we look at why it's so expensive, we have to ignore things like supply and demand and inflation, because obviously inflation's just making everything more expensive continually.
Oh,
So,
that's another episode.
put that aside. I mean, we can look at insulin and you can adjust for inflation and realize it is more expensive. And yes, we will talk about inflation because that's important. Something nobody understands. I think these things kind of emerged in my thinking here that the patent length is part of the problem. Like maybe it's a little bit too long, because right now I think it's like 20 years from the original filing of the patent, that you can hold it for 20 years. And essentially at that point you have a monopoly. So if you're the company that made it, you're the only company that can sell it. So I think we can do the math and realize you could charge whatever you want, especially if the demand is very high. Insulin being one of those things. So that's a big problem. And then the fact that drugs can be potentially repatented at some point, like insulin. It's been over 20 years, but it's still held under patent, and that's why there is no generic. I mean, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure there isn't, because if there was, you'd think it would be cheap like aspirin.
I think there is a generic. It's been a while since I read up on that, but generics aren't always like cheap. They're cheaper, but a lot of it is driven by the non-generic price. So you are saving money, but hey, look, we still get to make a whole bunch of money off of it.
Well, and
the thing I think about the patent length is it does make sense. You have to recoup cost and you want to make some profit.
Yeah, here's the thing. If you spent billions of dollars, $1 or $2 billion, which is kind of the average cost of developing a new drug, that's a huge investment, and you're going to want to make some money back on that. And businesses don't do things for free, so obviously they want to make a profit, and I think that's legitimate. And that drives, because the thing is, if they made no profit, there'd be no leftover funds to develop something new. They'd break even, right, and they'd go out of business. That would be stupid. So it's okay they make a profit, but I think there has to be some kind of line drawn there as to where that is right and where it's not.
Well, the idea I have is, at the head of the show, I said, I think this is a good idea that they're capping the price. That's with an asterisk. So I'm not 100% for telling companies how much they can charge for something, but I do think it would be a good idea to kind of kill two birds with one stone and fix the whole price fixing thing and the whole patent length thing by saying, we're not going to tell you what to cap the cost of your product, but we are going to tell you that once you make, I'm just going to throw out a number, once you make 25% profit margin, your patent will expire. So price it however you will, and you could run your patent out in 5 years, or you could run it out in 25. I mean,
that's
depends on how you.
It's a little arbitrary, but I mean, I guess it's better than nothing at that point, because right now it's kind of like, if you have the money to lobby the government, you can pretty much do what you want. And
Yeah.
I'm not even going to get into that because I have a lot of strong feelings about that one. But here's the thing: the problem I have about price controls is it moves the supply and demand curves artificially, and there's unintended consequences of that. There's effects that occur, and they're not necessarily good. Like if you price controls, especially a ceiling, tend to create shortages. It's like, I mean, this is not a matter for debate. This is just how it works. There will be shortages. And if it's something life-saving, I don't want there to be shortages. I want there to be a proliferance of it. Like insulin should be everywhere. You should be able to go to your corner store and buy it.
Yeah, well, here's a couple things. First off, I really don't think healthcare should be treated like a product with supply and demand, even if a lot of the same rules might apply, in an economic sense, which I don't think they all do exactly. It seems a little weird to be like, well, we're hoping to have this many sick people or whatever. And basically what you get there is the people with the rare diseases aren't getting any attention as far as drug manufacturing goes.
No, that's very true. And that is actually a product of supply and demand, unfortunately, because there are not very many people wanting a cure or a treatment for a very obscure disease.
Well,
and
there's a fix for that, though. There's a thing called an orphan drug grant or something like that, where if you have an idea for a disease that affects like a certain low threshold of the population, you can get extra grants that fund your research for that. Now, here's where the problem comes in. Like, that's a grant, right? You don't have to pay that back or anything. So,
well, you do actually, because if it comes from, I mean, is this a government grant or is this some kind of like charitable organization? There are differences there.
I don't know that exactly, but
if it's government grant, it comes from us paying taxes. Charitable organizations, it's voluntary, and people like willingly donate because they're like, hey, I had that disease and I'm going to donate, or I feel charitable.
It might be some combination thereof. I'm not entirely certain, but the point I'm driving at here is this is where the supply and demand problem comes in. What happens when you have a low demand? Your product becomes kind of exorbitantly expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not many people are buying it, so you want to make as much money as possible, so you got to have a high ticket.
You have the supply and demand curves. Well, whatever, you get it. The equilibrium is what the market price is going to be, and if you're very few and far between, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah. So zoom the microscope in on one person with one orphan disease. You've got this rare disease, super shitty, 1 in a million, whatever. You might die. Oh, hey, there's a drug that might help me. It costs $1 million. Now I'm poor.
Well, and
now my debts are affecting my family and all this stuff, and I might still die anyway because I can't afford it.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, how many people are going to pay $1 million for something like that if there are so few? I
threw out a random number.
Or whatever, $100,000 or something. Let's say something achievable by the average person. I mean, that crowdfunding. This is the thing. I think technology is the solution to everything in our modern era, and I think that's the way you would tackle that problem. But that we should probably talk about like rare diseases and that kind of solution separately, because I want to focus on insulin, because I think this is actually like kind of the core of this discussion, because it's not a rare disease. Like, people have diabetes. They like, it is a thing. Like, a lot of people are suffering from this, and there's treatment. Now,
Yeah.
I want to throw out there that before the development of insulin, there was no treatment in that sort of sense, in a medicinal sense. And the companies that developed it spent a lot of money in R&D, and they do deserve some kind of kickback for all their extra work. I mean, they're saving lives. That's kind of important. And yeah, it's going to be expensive, but
I mean, the question I have is, if this is driven by supply and demand, and like you said, there's a lot of people with diabetes, that's a high demand, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Didn't that drive the price down? If we're following the laws of supply and demand?
It would, but there's an unnatural force working upon this this diagram, and that is patents. The fact is, there's a monopoly on the supply. So they can pretty much ask whatever they want. And because the demand in this case is infinite, I mean, you will die. You know, it's not like a cheeseburger that you just, it sounds good and you want it. This is a matter of life and death. So your demand is very, very high. And if there's a restriction on competition, then you could essentially corner the market and charge whatever you want. And I think that's where the problem lies. The price is whatever. And I have a lot of other ideas on why this works the way it does. There's a component that's actually probably more than small. The FDA and regulations and regulatory organizations and things like that, they do impart some cost into that, but not when it's already been developed. Insulin has been around long enough. You have the development cost that's a factor. There's actually something I really want to touch on this, because I think this is something that's often ignored, and that is insurance covering the cost of medications might actually make the cost of medications more expensive, because you don't you don't go into a place like Burger King or McDonald's with an insurance card saying, I'm going to get Burger King or McDonald's. You could just buy whatever you want and it's going to be covered by the government. You choose because it's money out of your pocket. And if it's too expensive, if they're like, hey, this little skimpy little cheeseburger is $50, you're going to walk away. Well, when insurance is covering it, that whole entire process is concealed. You're paying the insurance rate, and they fluctuate based on your usage and other people's usage and stuff. It's all kind of cumulative, and it's this interconnected web. But you don't have to pay dollars out of your pocket that day for that thing. And I think that is actually harmful, because that's something that's missing. Like, have you ever gone into a doctor's office or something, and it's like a menu of prices on the wall of this is what heart surgery costs, and this is what cancer treatment costs? No, it's not like that. In fact, if you ask them, they don't even know. Nobody knows what it costs to do a thing. Maybe if you go into an optometrist and you get glasses or something, it's kind of out on the wall there. But in general, it isn't. And so you don't have this kind of choice. Not only that, but there's not a lot of choices to choose from. And the competition makes things cheaper and better. If you look at things that are not covered by insurance, like LASIK surgery, for example, the prices come down dramatically over the years, while things that insurance does cover have gone dramatically up over the years. I don't, correlation isn't causation, but there does come a point where it's kind of self-evident. So
No, it makes sense, and I actually really like your analogy or whatever it is, metaphor, I don't know,
Sure.
of food. Like let's pretend there was insurance for food.
Yeah. Well,
This
food
this
is
will give you an
also, keep in mind, food is also something important for life. Like you can't live without
right.
it. So,
Yeah, that's another topic, and
yeah.
insurance is another topic. But
Yeah.
this is to give you an idea of like how insurance affects things. Say you have insurance for food, you go to McDonald's. There's a cheeseburger for $1. You hand them the insurance card. Your copay for the cheeseburger is 20 cents. Well, the insurance company goes and negotiates with McDonald's and just pays them like 40 cents. And it costs them like 30 cents to make the burger. So they're getting like 10 cents. So they're like, well, we better jack up the price, you know?
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, because you bought a cheeseburger, now your insurance premiums go up.
Yeah. And don't forget that there's also paperwork costs behind the scenes. Like all of that insurance negotiation and all that stuff costs money somewhere because there's people working there that have to do this stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's not just like you with a wallet with some dollars in it deciding whether you're going to get like the rodeo cheeseburger or the 2 cheeseburgers meal at Burger King. No, I mean, there's like a whole team.
Oh, fish.
Yeah, yeah. There's a whole team of people deciding this stuff, and that adds cost. And so it comes back on us. And I mean, because keep in mind, there was a time where insurance, medical insurance, didn't cover drugs. It didn't cover most things. It was like catastrophic insurance, and it was cheap. You paid mostly out of pocket for things, and they were relatively affordable because it was a free market environment. Like, people had the choice to decide whether they wanted it or not, and they had to pay out of pocket. Now insurance covers like practically everything. And I think that might be part of the problem. I mean, I don't want to like point fingers at any one thing because I think it's multifaceted.
Well, something you said earlier about regulation, like the FDA, I mean, they don't really back out after the development because they're still very much ensconced in the manufacturing process. That GMP thing I mentioned earlier, like that, it's never not GMP if it's going to be ingested by a human being. Like,
yeah,
it's always got to go through these strict safety, policies, which is a very good thing. I mean,
yeah, I could see the value in that. Yeah,
yeah. If you've heard any of the stories about like the evolution of how we got to the FDA, like it makes sense. Like it's definitely necessary.
Well, and I mean, we can go into the topic of whether it could be a private organization or not, because I kind of actually think it could be, but we'll leave that alone for now. But yeah, I agree. The FDA does have some benefits, but bureaucracy does bring a lot of complexity and cost, and that cost gets passed on to the customer. It doesn't the companies running the show and lobbying and all this stuff, like the ones that have the deep pockets, like they're not paying the cost. It's the people at the bottom that are paying the cost, and so that has to be considered.
Yeah,
just a thought that kind of popped in my head.
Yeah,
I mean, there's this is like just a gigantic topic because we're talking like I don't know, maybe like a century of history in this topic, maybe more. I don't know. It depends on. Yeah, it goes way back.
yeah. It's hard to draw a line on where.
Yeah, and I think we just want to like kind of just put our feet in the water a little bit in this regard. But so I don't know. What do you think? Because I when I was reading, so I read an article recently from the AARP about why drug prices are so high, and it was rather interesting, like kind of an in-depth article. It went all over the place and stuff, But one thing that I saw emerge from that, and from other places too, is people make a comparison between the United States and other countries, and they say, well, it's so cheap in like the UK or Canada or Mexico or something. It's so cheap there, and it's so expensive in the United States. And I think that's something maybe we should quickly touch on, is the differences between those countries.
Yeah, there is a marked difference in, let's just say Canada. You go to Canada, something that costs $300 here might be 90 in Canada.
Yeah.
Like it way cheaper. And they have, I forget what their organization is called, but it's the equivalent of the FDA, and they're like internationally considered to be equivalent.
Yeah.
So,
No,
so they're safe. It's still a safe drug, and you're not paying out the ass. So
well, I mean, if
meanwhile here in the United States, the land of greed, between 2010 and 2015, prescription prices on average went up 60% or so, and the prescriptions being written were maybe half that. So like,
yeah. I mean, no, okay, let's consider, of course, there are differences between places like the UK and Canada that now we'll just limit ourselves to the discussion about pharmaceuticals and not medical procedures. But there's a lot more government subsidies there. And with government subsidies come higher taxes. So somebody's paying for it somewhere. Like, yeah, maybe it might seem cheaper, but overall, from a like national economic standpoint, it's pretty much the same price. I mean, or equivalent, I guess. I haven't run the numbers, but if you think about it, if there's somebody's paying that cost. I mean, especially if Canada observes the United States' patent laws and all of that, like they can't get away from that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other beast of a topic to go into, but you have slightly higher taxes somewhere, and typically you see people happier, like Scandinavian countries and stuff, and you ask them, man on the street style stuff has shown time and again that they're like, yeah, I don't mind paying a little extra to help everyone, because like I just adjust my lifestyle to fit it, and I don't then I know I don't have to worry about like running into a situation where I need $250,000 or whatever to do this medical procedure, because now it's covered. And that's the thing, like basically when you just have pennies coming out of your paycheck, you barely notice it, and you find a way to live based on whatever it is you're taking home.
Well,
but when you're faced with a situation where you get really ill, like, in my case, before the Affordable Care Act, I had cancer twice. I ended up, after insurance, after Medicaid, so I had two insurances, I got stuck with $250,000 in medical bills.
Oh, I remember that. And that was crazy. And I mean, that again, that goes back to the whole idea that maybe like crowdfunding might be a good solution to that. But that aside,
that's kind of what got me through.
Those other countries, like, they are a little bit different. So they're not. I mean, people talk about like Sweden and stuff, like Sweden is socialist or something, but it's not. It's actually highly capitalistic, and it just has high taxes to pay for certain particular social programs. They're actually like more economically free than the United States, which would blow a lot of people's minds. But they have very high taxes for everybody. And so I guess it's a matter of like what what's important to people. Now, of course, places like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, they're very tiny compared to this giant country that we live in right now. And so I don't know that there's it's not an easy comparison between the two. It's a little bit different, a little more homogenous, a little more isolated. So I don't know. We'll have to dig.
That's certainly
that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because if you look at those countries now, they do things a little bit differently, and as a result, they're able to do those things. We don't do the same things. Like, our system is not as business friendly here in the US as it is in Sweden. And so I don't know. And
yeah,
this is way too big of a topic to get into, but
yeah.
let's go back.
All I know is I took Swedish in college because I've got my eyes set on living there someday.
Place, I can tell you. I mean, I haven't been there, but I have family from there, so it's a cool place.
Yeah.
So okay, let's go back to all of this. And we talked about like a bunch of things, like the problems with things and stuff. So what do you think about solutions? Maybe I'll just outline a few things that I have been thinking about for this. I mean, it's probably not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's things that I think about. One thing that I was thinking about, let's limit it again to the insulin conversation. What about self-import? So if it's cheap in another country, why not just import it? If Canada's version of the FDA is every bit as legit as the US FDA, how come we can't just import it? There is a law for that, actually. There's legal precedent for that. I think it actually came from the AIDS epidemic, like in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, to allow for the importation of experimental drugs for the treatment of AIDS patients. And the FDA insists that it's like limited to only the most extreme cases, but I've used it to import things. Let's just say, I won't say what.
Yeah,
but
I have as well.
yeah. And so, why not just bypass all of the whole system and self-import from another country? And if it's banned, say, hey, well, why don't we change that? That's a thought. Another thought that I had is shorter patent lifespans. Maybe 20 years is too long for proper innovation and improvement of drugs. Maybe it's 5 years. Maybe 5 years is good. Leave it at that. Like, that should be enough time. Because the fact is, innovation is the important thing. Profits are important, yes. If you've sunk billions of dollars into developing something, yeah, you should totally like recoup what you've spent. I get it. But 20 years? That is a long flipping time. And no re-upping. Like, if you've hit that threshold, it's done.
Yeah,
your time is up.
Walt Disneying this stuff.
Yeah. Oh God, the Walt Disney thing with the copyright law, like, it's 75 years or whatever it is. That is insane. Like, no. Yeah. There is a point where things need to be released to public domain. I mean, yeah.
So I don't know.
I have a couple extra
my
things.
solution ideas. Oh yeah.
Yeah, let me just go through these things, and then you can like throw in your stuff. Probably the most controversial idea that I'll propose tonight is less regulation on the industry. Now, It doesn't necessarily mean that you'd have less safety. I just mean like less complexity in that regulation. Because yeah, okay, the FDA does do some good stuff, but they also like make things stupidly, insanely difficult. And I don't know that it does everybody any good. And it's not just the FDA. There's other organizations that are culpable in this. But I think a limitation on how much control those organizations can have might go a little ways to making things cheaper. Okay, I said it was the most controversial, but there's one even more controversial, and that is rogue DIY medicine. You could just say, screw the government, screw the regulations, I'm going to develop my own thing, which I think we've actually discussed that, because there was a group of people, basically like a bunch of people developing insulin independently of the system to provide insulin, and like in a sort of anarchist kind of way, like, you know, they're just developing it and they're going to release it. That's a solution too. Not necessarily safe. Definitely don't advocate for that. But you know, that's a thought. If your life is on the line, maybe.
I mean, I'll say this: like, why not? If you decide to go that route, I don't think anybody's stopping you from doing that, because we allow homeopathy to be a thing.
Well,
and that's basically like taking water to fix something.
Sure, and it goes back to the things we've talked about before, like suicide and abortion, like self-ownership. You have a right as a human being to put whatever you want into your body, even if it's a poison. And so, especially if you think if it'll save your life.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think I've said enough. So go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've already kind of touched on my idea for a solution, and that is, I mean, we talked about the fair tax, right? I kind of want to liken it to that, where basically like you have this patent length.
Wait a minute, hold on. Sorry,
you're just trying to censor me, man.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, a patent. Yes.
Casey's gonna spew some socialist bullshit.
Oh yeah.
Basically, you have a patent length based on a certain profit margin, you know, and make it a healthy one, sure, whatever number. Because you know we're all in business to make money, and everyone should be able to make money and have a comfortable living or whatever. And then when it comes to generic stuff, there's no, you know, that's totally free market right there. So I think there would still be plenty of competition going on in the generic realm, you know? And
well, yeah, the other day, like I was able to buy a giant bottle of aspirin from the Dollar Tree for $1.
Yeah.
And like, how come I can't do that with insulin?
Yeah. And here's the thing. If you developed the drug, you have this automatic upper hand when it comes to, you know, the end of the patent. You can be like, we are the creators of blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know, and that goes a long way, you know,
psychologically, yeah. Psychologically, it's like a big impact. Like people put a lot of credence in the people who originated an idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
regardless of patents, if patents didn't exist, they would still do that, because that's a big thing.
Right.
You look to any product for that. Yeah.
So, and I literally came up with that like after the show started.
Nice.
So it's rough, of course, but
no, I think it's a good point. That actually, yeah, I like that actually a lot. Yeah.
So I don't know. Let's see what the people have to say, and leave it to them leave their comments and stories about drug pricing and all that good stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, it's really shitty that a lot of these prices are so high that people can't afford them, and it really, man, I've heard a lot of stories, and tell us your stories. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I choose to live in pain every day because I don't want to pay the exorbitant prices for certain medications.
yeah, and that's crap. Like, you shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
You know, when I could buy a giant bottle of like 200 or 400 tablets of aspirin for $1, you should be able to get whatever drug you need for a few dollars or whatever, you know. Yeah, there's so many more things we could talk about this, because this is a huge topic and it goes all over the place, but I think this is a pretty good introduction. Like, it's a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So leave us your comments and make sure to subscribe and hit that little bell so you get notifications when we release episodes.
Yeah. If you have any critiques or if you have your own life stories to share, feel free to do them, and you know, we'd love to hear from you. Keep the conversation going, and thanks for deep sink diving with us.
Good night.
All right.
Yeah.